Hello everyone, before we begin tonight's haunting tale, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of the fear. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time the unknown feels closest to you. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and let the whispers of the unknown guide you through the eerie corridors of our story. Ready to face the darkness? Silent Pines Forest lay sprawled across the Montana wilderness like an ancient sentinel, its dense evergreens piercing the mist-covered sky. To outsiders, it was a picturesque haven of natural beauty, its towering trees and crystal-clear streams an inviting escape from the chaos of modern life. But to the locals of Havens Ridge, Silent Pines was a place to be feared, a cursed expanse where the natural and the supernatural blurred into one. Stories passed down through generations told of strange disappearances, blood-curdling screams in the night, and a predatory force that roamed the woods, unseen yet omnipresent. The townsfolk spoke of the Moor, a Wendigo-like spirit born from violence and greed, its name whispered in hushed tones as both warning and lament. This creature, they claimed, was no mere ghost story. It was a force of vengeance tied to the land itself, punishing those who dared disturb the delicate balance of the forest. The lore surrounding the Moor painted it as a towering, emaciated figure with glowing eyes that pierced the darkness and elongated limbs that moved with terrifying speed. It was said to feed on fear and despair, growing stronger with every life it claimed. Despite the warnings, the allure of Silent Pines had proven irresistible to hikers and adventurers seeking the thrill of the unknown. The forest's dense fog added to its mystique, shrouding the trails in an ever-present veil that seemed to shift and breathe with a life of its own. The fog was so thick in places that it swallowed sound, leaving visitors in an eerie silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant calls of wildlife. It was in this silence that the Moor was said to thrive, its guttural growls and bone-chilling whispers carrying through the mist like a phantom's song. In recent months, Silent Pines had become the epicenter of an unsettling mystery. Reports of missing hikers had surged, each disappearance marked by the same ominous signs: shredded tents, torn gear, and trails of blood leading deeper into the woods. Search parties sent into the forest returned empty-handed, their efforts hindered by the oppressive fog and an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to cling to them long after they emerged. Rumors swirled through Havens Ridge, each more chilling than the last. Some claimed to have seen glowing eyes watching from the treetops, while others spoke of hearing disembodied voices calling their names. The latest disappearance had shaken the town to its core. A family of 4, the Parkers, had ventured into Silent Pines for a weekend camping trip and never returned. Their campsite had been discovered days later, a scene of chaos and violence. Their tent was slashed to ribbons, their belongings scattered, and claw marks gouged deep into the surrounding trees. Blood trails led away from the site, disappearing into the impenetrable depths of the forest. The sheriff had declared the area off-limits, but the warning signs erected at the trailheads did little to deter thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts drawn by the macabre allure of the Moor. The local tribal elder, Clara Greyfeather, had long been the keeper of Silent Pines' secrets. Her warnings about the Moor were often dismissed as folklore by the younger generation, but those who knew Clara respected her deep connection to the land and its history. To Clara, the Moor was not merely a legend, it was a guardian of the forest's sacred balance, corrupted by the greed and destruction wrought by human hands. She often spoke of a desecrated site deep within the woods, a place where the sacred ground had been violated by loggers decades ago. It was here, she claimed, that the Moor drew its strength, feeding on the pain and suffering that had festered in the forest ever since. "The forest remembers," Clara would say, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Every tree, every stone carries the weight of what has been done. The Moor is not a monster. It is a reckoning." Silent Pines was more than just a forest, it was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the boundary between the physical and the spiritual blurred. The towering trees formed a labyrinthine canopy, their branches intertwining to create a natural cathedral that blocked out the sun. Streams wound through the underbrush like veins, their crystal-clear waters reflecting the shifting light of the mist. But beneath its serene facade lay a darker truth, one that the townsfolk of Havens Ridge understood all too well. Those who ventured too far into Silent Pines often spoke of a change in the air, an intangible shift that signaled they had crossed an invisible threshold. The vibrant sounds of nature would fade, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to press against the skin. The light filtering through the trees would take on an unnatural quality, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. It was in these moments that visitors realized they were no longer alone, that the forest itself was watching. For Alex Thatcher, Silent Pines was both a refuge and a battleground. Returning to the forest as a ranger was a chance to confront the demons of their past while protecting the land they had once called home. But as Alex stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the swirling mist that seemed to beckon them forward, they couldn't shake the feeling that Silent Pines was more alive than ever and that it had been waiting for their return. Alex Thatcher stood at the edge of Silent Pines forest, the mist swirling around their boots like a living entity. The forest's imposing stillness was almost comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos that had defined much of their life. Alex had grown up in Havens Ridge, a small town nestled at the base of the Montana wilderness, where stories of Silent Pines had been as common as the cold mountain air. Those stories had shaped their childhood, but now they were no longer the wide-eyed kid listening to tales of the moor around a campfire. They were a forest ranger, trained, disciplined, and determined to confront whatever truths lay hidden in those trees. For Alex, the decision to return to Silent Pines was not an easy one. After years serving as a Marine, they had hoped to leave the scars of war behind, but the memories had followed them like shadows. The adrenaline-fueled chaos of combat had left them with a deep-seated restlessness, an inability to find peace no matter how far they traveled. Havens Ridge and the forest that bordered it offered a chance to reconnect with something simpler, something grounding. But peace was not what Alex found when they returned. Alex's first days as a ranger were uneventful, spent patrolling the familiar trails and reacquainting themselves with the forest's rhythms. The smell of pine and damp earth was like a balm, a reminder of quieter times. Yet, beneath the surface, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Locals whispered about the recent disappearances, their voices tinged with fear and resignation. Every mention of the hikers who had gone missing in Silent Pines came with the same refrain: the forest takes what it wants. Despite their skepticism, Alex couldn't ignore the unease that settled over the town. As a child, they had heard the same warnings, but they had always dismissed them as superstition. Now, standing in the shadow of the forest, they weren't so sure. The stories of the moor felt less like folklore and more like a dire warning. Alex's childhood had been shaped by Silent Pines in ways they were only beginning to understand. Their earliest memories were of exploring the forest with their father, a rugged and practical man who had taught them how to navigate the wilderness. Under his guidance, Alex had learned to track animals, build shelters, and read the subtle signs of nature. Those lessons had been invaluable during their time in the Marines, where survival often depended on their ability to adapt and persevere. But the forest had also been a place of mystery, a realm where the lines between reality and imagination blurred. As a child, Alex had been fascinated by the tales of the moor, a creature that supposedly roamed Silent Pines, preying on the unwary. Their father had dismissed the stories as nonsense, but Alex's curiosity had only grown. They had spent countless afternoons venturing deeper into the woods, searching for signs of the creature. Now, years later, they couldn't help but wonder if they had been searching for something else all along, proof that the world was bigger and stranger than it seemed. The decision to join the Marines had been driven by a need to escape. Havens Ridge, with its small-town routines and suffocating familiarity, had felt like a cage. Alex had wanted to see the world, to test themselves against its challenges. The military had provided that opportunity, but it had also exacted a heavy toll. The constant vigilance, the split-second decisions, the weight of responsibility, all of it had left scars that ran deeper than the physical. Returning to Havens Ridge had been an attempt to heal, but the forest's shadows offered little solace. As the reports of disappearances grew more frequent, Alex found themselves drawn into the mystery of Silent Pines. It wasn't just the missing hikers that bothered them, it was the signs of violence that accompanied each case. Shredded tents, claw marks on trees, trails of blood that led deeper into the woods, the evidence pointed to something far more dangerous than a wild animal. The descriptions from the survivors who had ventured too close were chilling: guttural growls, glowing eyes, and a suffocating sense of dread that paralyzed them in their tracks. Alex's training kicked in, their instincts sharpened by years of navigating hostile environments. They began to see patterns in the chaos, subtle clues that hinted at a predator unlike any they had encountered before. Tracks that didn't match any known species, unnatural silence in areas that should have been teeming with life, and the strange symbols carved into trees, all of it pointed to something intelligent, something deliberate. One evening, as Alex sat in their cabin reviewing their notes, a knock at the door startled them. Standing on the porch was Clara Greyfeather, the tribal elder whose warnings about the moor had become the stuff of local legend. Clara's presence was both unexpected and unsettling. She rarely ventured into town, let alone sought out strangers. "You're the new ranger," she said, her voice low and steady. "You've been asking questions about the disappearances." Alex nodded, gesturing for her to come inside. "I'm trying to figure out what's happening in the forest. People are scared, and they have a right to be." Clara studied them for a moment before stepping into the cabin. She carried an air of quiet authority, her presence filling the small space. "You won't find your answers in books or reports," she said. "The forest doesn't work that way." Alex frowned, their curiosity piqued. "Then how does it work?" Clara placed a small, leather pouch on the table. "The forest has a balance. When that balance is broken, something must restore it. The moor is not a monster. It is a consequence." Alex opened the pouch, revealing a talisman made of bone and sinew, its surface etched with intricate symbols. "What is this?" "A protection," Clara said. "It won't save you if you ignore the forest's warnings, but it might buy you time." That night, Alex dreamed of silent pines. In their dream, the forest was alive with whispers, the trees bending toward them as if to speak. The ground beneath their feet was soft and yielding, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and decay. A shadow moved through the mist, its glowing eyes fixed on them. When they woke, the talisman lay on the table, its symbols faintly glowing in the moonlight. From that moment on, Alex's connection to the forest deepened. They began to see the patterns Clara had spoken of, the ways in which the forest communicated its pain. Every snapped branch, every claw mark, every patch of disturbed earth told a story. And at the center of it all was the moor, a force as ancient and unrelenting as the forest itself. Alex knew they couldn't turn away. Silent Pines had called them home for a reason, and it was up to them to answer. The tension in Haven's Ridge had reached a fever pitch as the disappearances in Silent Pines continued to mount. It wasn't just the frequency of the vanishings that alarmed the townsfolk, it was the grisly aftermath that painted a picture too horrific to ignore. Rangers found campsites slashed to tatters, with tents ripped open as though by claws too large for any known predator. The forest floor was often stained with blood trails that seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving no other trace of the missing. Among the most chilling discoveries was the Parker family's campsite. The Parkers, a family of 4, had planned a weekend getaway to reconnect with nature. When they failed to return, search teams ventured into the forest only to find devastation. Their tent was shredded, belongings scattered as if in a frenzy, and trees surrounding the site bore deep gouges that defied explanation. The blood trails leading away from the site disappeared after a few hundred yards, leaving no indication of where the family had gone. The incident marked a turning point, solidifying Silent Pines' reputation as a place best left alone. Alex Thatcher, the newly appointed forest ranger, felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on their shoulders. The safety of the forest and its visitors was their charge, but Silent Pines was unlike any terrain they had navigated before. The disappearances had transformed their role from protector to investigator, forcing them to confront questions that had no clear answers. The reports from the search teams were consistent yet maddeningly vague. Survivors who had ventured too far into Silent Pines described a presence, a shadow that moved through the fog, watching and waiting. Some spoke of guttural growls that seemed to come from all directions at once, while others described hearing whispers in an unfamiliar language. These accounts, combined with the eerie claw marks and mutilated wildlife found along the trails, painted a picture of a predator that was both intelligent and cruel. As the newest ranger, Alex had inherited not just the job but the fears and suspicions of the townsfolk. Locals avoided Silent Pines whenever possible, their stories blending folklore with cautionary tales. Chief among these was the legend of the moor, a Wendigo-like creature said to haunt the forest. The elders in Haven's Ridge described it as a vengeful spirit, born of greed and violence, feeding on the fear and despair of those who entered its domain. Its form was said to be monstrous, towering and emaciated, with glowing eyes that pierced the darkness and limbs that moved with unnatural speed. Though Alex was skeptical of such tales, they couldn't ignore the patterns emerging in their investigation. The claw marks on trees were unlike anything they had seen before, too large and too deliberate to belong to any native animal. Tracks left behind by the creature defied identification, their size and shape suggesting a predator that existed outside the natural order. Each new discovery reinforced a grim reality. Whatever was stalking the forest, it was far more dangerous than any animal. The Parker family's disappearance was still fresh in everyone's minds when another incident rocked the town. A pair of hikers had gone missing, their trail leading deep into the heart of Silent Pines. When Alex and a search party found their campsite, the scene mirrored the Parkers' shredded gear, clawed trees, and no sign of the hikers. But this time, there was something new. Strange symbols were etched into the trees around the site, intricate patterns that seemed almost ritualistic. The carvings were unlike anything Alex had seen before, their meaning as elusive as the creature that had left them. Seeking answers, Alex turned to Clara Greyfeather, the local tribal elder and a figure of quiet authority in Haven's Ridge. Clara was a woman of wisdom and strength, her knowledge of the forest and its history unmatched. She had spent decades warning anyone who would listen about the dangers of disturbing Silent Pines, but her words were often dismissed as superstition. When Alex approached her, she regarded them with a mix of curiosity and caution. "You've seen the signs," Clara said, her voice steady. It wasn't a question. "You've heard the forest's warnings." Alex nodded. "I need to understand what's happening out there. These disappearances, they don't make sense. I don't know what we're dealing with." Clara studied them for a long moment before speaking. "The forest has a balance. When that balance is broken, something must restore it. The moor is not a monster. It is a consequence of what we've done to this land." She went on to explain that Silent Pines was home to a sacred site, a place where the earth's energy was strongest. Decades ago, loggers had desecrated the area, cutting down ancient trees and disturbing the ground. The forest had not forgiven their trespass, and the moor had emerged as a manifestation of its rage. It was a corrupted spirit, bound to the forest and feeding on the fear and despair of those who dared enter its domain. Clara handed Alex a small leather pouch containing a talisman made of bone and sinew, its surface etched with intricate symbols. "This will protect you," she said. "But only if you respect the forest's rules. The moor cannot be killed, only weakened. To survive, you must confront the source of its power and restore what was lost." Alex accepted the talisman, its weight unfamiliar yet comforting in their hand. "What's the source?" they asked. Clara's expression darkened. "The desecrated ground. Find it, and you'll find your answers. But be warned, the forest does not forgive easily." The stakes became painfully clear when Alex returned to their cabin that night. The claw marks that had appeared on other sites were now carved into their door, deep and deliberate. The whispers they had heard on patrols were closer, louder, as though the forest itself was speaking to them. Sleep eluded Alex, their mind racing with questions and fears. What was the moor? Could the desecrated ground truly be the key to ending the disappearances? And what would they find when they confronted the creature that had haunted Silent Pines for decades? The answers lay deep within the forest, shrouded in mist and shadows. As Alex prepared to venture further into Silent Pines, they couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching, waiting for the moment they crossed the invisible threshold. The stakes had never been higher, and Alex knew that their survival and the safety of Haven's Ridge depended on what they would uncover in the days to come. The first signs were subtle, almost easy to dismiss. For Alex Thatcher, the quiet stillness of Silent Pines forest felt like a balm at first. The way the fog hung low, softening the jagged edges of the landscape, gave the forest an otherworldly beauty. But soon, that quiet transformed into something far more sinister. The usual chatter of wildlife, birds calling from treetops, squirrels rustling in the underbrush, had faded, replaced by a silence so deep it felt alive. The air grew heavier, pressing against Alex's chest like a warning. During a routine patrol along the forest's outer trails, Alex first noticed the mutilated animals. A deer lay sprawled near the edge of a clearing, its body twisted unnaturally. Its wounds were unlike any Alex had seen before, precise, almost surgical, with deep gashes that spoke of claws far sharper than any predator native to the region. Nearby, tufts of fur clung to the bark of a tree, as if the animal had been dragged there in its final moments. Alex crouched, examining the scene with a practiced eye. No tracks, they muttered, their voice barely audible in the oppressive silence. The ground, damp from the morning mist, should have held footprints or paw marks. Instead, it was undisturbed, as though whatever had killed the deer had simply materialized and vanished. Alex's hand instinctively brushed against the talisman Clara Greyfeather had given them. The carved bone felt warm to the touch, a small comfort against the growing unease in their chest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Alex returned to their cabin, the events of the day replaying in their mind. They'd seen death before, on the battlefield and in the wilderness, but this felt different. The calculated precision of the wounds, the absence of tracks, the eerie silence of the forest, it all pointed to something that defied explanation. Settling into their desk, Alex began to jot down notes, their handwriting jagged with urgency. Deer carcass, deep claw marks. No signs of struggle, no tracks. Nearby trees, clawed. Marks too high for wolves or bears. The scratching of pen on paper was interrupted by a sound that made Alex freeze. A low, guttural growl echoed through the cabin, seeming to come from all directions at once. They rose slowly, heart pounding, and grabbed the flashlight from the edge of the desk. The beam of light sliced through the darkness as they peered out the window, scanning the fog-shrouded trees for movement. Nothing. The growl came again, this time closer, vibrating through the walls of the cabin. Alex's grip tightened on the flashlight as they edged toward the door. The talisman around their neck seemed to hum faintly, a reminder of Clara's warnings. Steeling their nerves, Alex opened the door, the cold night air rushing in to meet them. The forest was still. Too still. Even the gentle rustle of leaves seemed to have ceased, leaving only the distant hum of the wind threading through the trees. Alex stepped onto the porch, their flashlight beam sweeping the ground. And there it was, claw marks gouged into the wood of the cabin door. They were deep and deliberate, the grooves wide enough to suggest a creature of considerable size. Alex's stomach churned. They'd seen similar marks at the Parker family's campsite, but finding them here, at their sanctuary, was a chilling escalation. Whatever had left those marks was no longer confined to the depths of silent pines. It was watching them. The following day, Alex ventured deeper into the forest, determined to uncover more clues. The fog seemed thicker than usual, wrapping around the trees like a living entity. The deeper they went, the more the forest changed. Trees stood gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. The ground beneath Alex's boots grew softer, almost spongy, as though the forest itself was decaying. Near a narrow stream, Alex found another disturbing scene. A raccoon lay dead, its body arranged in a way that felt deliberate. Its limbs were splayed, and its head was turned at an unnatural angle, as though it had been posed. Surrounding it were small stones arranged in a circular pattern, each marked with a crude symbol carved into their surface. Alex knelt to examine the symbols, their unease growing. "What is this?" they murmured, snapping a photo with their phone. The symbols didn't match any of the natural markers they'd encountered during their training, nor did they resemble anything from Clara's teachings. It was as if the forest itself was sending a message, one that Alex couldn't yet decipher. As twilight descended, Alex's patrol took them to an old fire lookout tower, long abandoned but still standing as a sentinel over the forest. Climbing the rickety stairs, they hoped to gain a clearer view of the trails below. But when they reached the top, the sight that greeted them made their blood run cold. Far below, in a clearing shrouded by mist, stood a figure. It was humanoid in shape but impossibly tall, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, it simply stood, its glowing eyes fixed on the lookout tower. Alex's breath caught in their throat as the figure slowly raised one elongated arm, pointing directly at them. For what felt like an eternity, Alex stared back, frozen in place. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure dissolved into the fog, leaving no trace of its presence. Alex descended the tower, their mind racing. Was this the moor? Or was it something else entirely, another piece of the forest's cryptic puzzle? That night, sleep was a fleeting concept. The growls returned, punctuated by whispers that seemed to creep through the walls of the cabin. Alex lay awake, clutching the talisman Clara had given them, its carved surface warm against their skin. The forest was no longer just a place of danger, it was a predator, watching and waiting. The first signs of the moor had revealed themselves, and Alex knew they were only scratching the surface of the mystery that lay within Silent Pines. But one thing was clear, whatever was hunting in the forest wasn't finished with them yet. The growls and claw marks had transformed Silent Pines from an unsettling mystery into a palpable threat. Alex Thatcher knew they couldn't face this alone. The cryptic signs and eerie encounters demanded answers that no training manual or survival guide could provide. It was time to seek help from someone who understood the forest's secrets, Clara Greyfeather. The morning was cold and grey as Alex made their way to Clara's cabin on the outskirts of Havens Ridge. Clara's home was as much a part of the forest as the towering pines that surrounded it, its wooden frame weathered by years of harsh winters and heavy rains. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the faint scent of burning sage. Alex hesitated at the door, their hand hovering over the rough-hewn wood before knocking. "Come in," Clara's voice called, calm and steady. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit, its walls adorned with tribal artifacts and dried herbs hanging in bundles. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. Clara sat at a table in the center of the room, her sharp eyes fixed on Alex as they entered. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked, her tone leaving no room for pretense. Alex nodded, the memory of the figure in the mist still fresh in their mind. "I think it's the moor," they said. "Or something connected to it. I need to understand what's happening." Clara gestured for Alex to sit. She reached for a small pouch on the table, spilling its contents, bones, stones, and feathers onto a worn leather mat. As she began arranging them in a deliberate pattern, she spoke. "The moor isn't a creature like the ones you've hunted before," she said. "It's a spirit, born of human greed and violence. Long ago, this land was sacred, its balance protected by rituals and offerings. But when the loggers came, they desecrated the sacred ground, cutting down the ancient trees and spilling blood on the earth. The forest remembers, and the moor is its memory made flesh." Clara's words painted a picture that was both chilling and tragic. She explained that the moor was not simply a predator but a force of vengeance, feeding on fear and despair. It grew stronger with every life it claimed, its presence a reminder of the pain inflicted on the forest. "There's a reason the animals flee," Clara continued. "They can sense it, the hunger, the rage. The forest is alive, Alex, and it's crying out for help." Alex leaned forward, their mind racing. "How do we stop it?" Clara's eyes met theirs, her expression grave. "You can't stop it. But you can weaken it. The desecrated ground must be restored. Only then can the balance be mended." She handed Alex a small talisman, its surface etched with intricate symbols. "This will protect you," she said. "But it won't save you if you ignore the forest's warnings. The moor is cunning. It knows how to twist fear into power." Armed with the talisman and Clara's guidance, Alex began their search for the desecrated ground. The forest seemed even more oppressive than before, its shadows deeper and its silence more profound. Clara had told them to look for signs of the old rituals, totems, carvings, or remnants of offerings. But the forest offered little in the way of clues, its secrets buried beneath layers of time and decay. After hours of searching, Alex stumbled upon a clearing that felt different from the rest of the forest. The air was colder here, and the ground was littered with decayed wood and rusted tools. At the center of the clearing stood a single, massive stump, its surface scarred with deep gouges. Surrounding it were small stone totems, their surfaces weathered but still bearing faint carvings. "This has to be it," Alex muttered, crouching to examine one of the totems. The carvings were unlike anything they had seen before, a mix of geometric patterns and symbols that seemed almost alive. They took photos, their camera's shutter breaking the eerie silence. Among the debris, Alex found a small, weathered journal. Its pages were brittle with age, the ink faded but still legible. The entries belonged to a logger named William Reed, who had worked at the site decades ago. As Alex read, a chilling story began to unfold. June 5, 1927. The men are uneasy. Strange noises at night, like growls and whispers. They say the forest doesn't want us here, but I think it's just nerves. We've made good progress clearing the trees. Another week, and we'll be done. June 12, 1927. Something killed one of the horses last night. Henry found it this morning, torn to pieces. No tracks, no sign of what did it. The men are spooked. I told them to focus on the work, but I'm starting to feel it too, like something's watching us. June 18, 1927. We found something buried beneath one of the trees. Totems, bones, and what looked like an altar. The men wanted to leave it alone, but Mr. Carter said it was just superstitious nonsense. We destroyed it to make room for the equipment. That night, the growls started. The journal ended abruptly, its final pages smeared with what looked like dried blood. Alex closed the book, their stomach churning. The desecrated ground wasn't just a legend, it was real, and its disturbance had unleashed a force beyond their comprehension. As the sun began to set, Alex felt the now familiar weight of being watched. The forest seemed to close in around them, the fog thickening until it was almost suffocating. They clutched the talisman, its warmth a small comfort against the growing chill. "Whatever you are," Alex said aloud, their voice steady despite their fear, "I'm not afraid of you." The growl that answered was low and guttural, vibrating through the trees. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. Alex knew they had taken the first step into a much larger battle, one that would test every skill and ounce of courage they possessed. But they also knew they couldn't turn back. The answers they sought were buried in silent pines, and the forest wasn't finished with them yet. The deeper Alex ventured into silent pines, the more the forest seemed to change around them. The air grew colder, and the oppressive silence that had haunted their earlier patrols became almost deafening. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Every step felt heavier, the dense fog wrapping around Alex like a shroud. The trees loomed taller and more twisted, their branches intertwining above to form a canopy that barely let in the dim light of the overcast sky. Clara's words echoed in Alex's mind, the desecrated ground must be restored. But finding it was proving to be a greater challenge than they had anticipated. The forest offered no clear path, its winding trails seemingly designed to confuse and disorient. Alex relied on instinct and the faint, subtle signs Clara had taught them to recognize: unnatural markings on trees, clusters of withered plants, and areas where the forest's energy felt wrong, heavy, stagnant, and filled with a quiet malevolence. Underscore 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 underscore. It was mid-afternoon when Alex stumbled upon an area that sent a chill down their spine. The ground beneath their boots was uneven and littered with debris, rusted tools, broken planks of wood, and fragments of glass that caught the pale light. In the center of the clearing stood a massive tree stump, its surface scarred with deep gouges. Surrounding it were stone totems, their surfaces weathered by time but still bearing faint carvings that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. Alex crouched by one of the totems, running their fingers over the carvings. The symbols were a mix of geometric shapes and abstract patterns, unlike anything they had encountered before. They snapped a few photos, the camera's shutter breaking the eerie silence. Despite their unease, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they had found the desecrated ground Clara had spoken of. "This has to be it," they murmured, their voice barely audible. As they continued to explore the clearing, Alex's attention was drawn to a small, weathered journal half buried beneath a pile of decayed wood. The cover was cracked and brittle, but the pages inside were surprisingly intact. The handwriting was uneven, as though the writer had been in a hurry or under duress. Flipping through the pages, Alex realized they were holding the account of one of the loggers who had worked at the site decades ago. June 5, 1927. The men are uneasy. Strange noises at night, like growls and whispers. They say the forest doesn't want us here, but I think it's just nerves. We've made good progress clearing the trees. Another week, and we'll be done. June 12, 1927. Something killed one of the horses last night. Henry found it this morning, torn to pieces. No tracks, no sign of what did it. The men are spooked. I told them to focus on the work, but I'm starting to feel it too, like something's watching us. June 18, 1927. We found something buried beneath one of the trees. Totems, bones, and what looked like an altar. The men wanted to leave it alone, but Mr. Carter said it was just superstitious nonsense. We destroyed it to make room for the equipment. That night, the growls started. The journal's final pages were smeared with what looked like dried blood, the writing trailing off into illegible scrawls. Alex's stomach churned as they closed the book, the weight of the story sinking in. The desecration of this site had not only unleashed the moor but had also left a scar on the forest that had festered for decades. The clearing felt alive with a sinister energy, as though the ground itself resented Alex's presence. The sun was beginning to set when Alex noticed the first signs that they were no longer alone. A faint growl rippled through the air, low and guttural, sending a shiver down their spine. They turned slowly, scanning the edge of the clearing with their flashlight. The beam cut through the fog, revealing nothing but twisted trees and shifting shadows. "Show yourself," Alex said, their voice steady despite the pounding of their heart. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of branches snapping underfoot. Alex's grip tightened on the talisman Clara had given them, its surface warm against their palm. They backed toward the center of the clearing, their eyes darting between the shadows as the oppressive silence pressed in around them. And then, it appeared. Emerging from the tree line was a figure unlike anything Alex had ever seen. It was tall and emaciated, its limbs elongated and twisted at unnatural angles. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its skeletal frame, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent light that pierced through the fog. The creature's movements were deliberate and slow, as though it knew there was no need to rush. It was the hunter, and Alex was the prey. Time seemed to slow as Alex faced the creature. They raised their flashlight, the beam illuminating its grotesque features. The creature let out a guttural snarl, its elongated fingers curling into claws as it took a step forward. Alex's instincts screamed at them to run, but they held their ground, the talisman in their hand providing a tenuous sense of protection. "I know what you are," Alex said, their voice trembling but firm. "I know what happened here." The creature paused, its glowing eyes narrowing as though considering Alex's words. For a moment, the forest fell silent again, the weight of the encounter pressing down on Alex like a physical force. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, the creature lunged. Alex dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's claws as they raked through the air where they had been standing. Scrambling to their feet, Alex grabbed a nearby branch, its jagged end sharp enough to serve as a makeshift weapon. The creature snarled, its movements unnervingly fluid as it circled the clearing. Alex swung the branch, the force of the blow enough to momentarily stagger the creature. Using the brief reprieve, Alex reached into their pack and pulled out a flare. They struck it, the bright red light cutting through the fog and casting long shadows across the clearing. The creature recoiled, its glowing eyes narrowing against the sudden brightness. Alex held the flare high, its heat and light a barrier between them and the advancing threat. The creature let out a deafening roar, its form flickering as though caught between worlds. Alex took a step forward, brandishing the flare like a torch. "You're tied to this place," they said, their voice rising above the creature's growls. "But you don't control it." The creature hesitated, its form shifting and distorting as though the light was unraveling it. Alex seized the moment, grabbing the totems from the clearing and placing them around the massive tree stump. They lit another flare, the combined light creating a circle of protection that seemed to push back the darkness. As the creature howled in rage, Alex stood their ground, the talisman burning hot against their chest. They didn't know if the makeshift barrier would hold, but one thing was certain: The desecrated ground held the key to defeating the Maw. And Alex was determined to uncover its secrets, no matter the cost. Alex Thatcher stood at the edge of the forest, the weight of the talisman around their neck grounding them as they stared into the mist-laden expanse of silent pines. They had seen the creature, its glowing eyes, its unnatural movements, its raw, terrifying power. But they had also seen its vulnerability, the brief flicker of humanity buried beneath its monstrous exterior. Alex knew now that the only way to defeat the Maw was to confront it at its source, the desecrated ground. But this confrontation would be unlike any battle they had faced before. This wasn't just about survival, it was about restoring balance to the forest and, perhaps, to themselves. The first step was preparation. Alex returned to their cabin, its wooden walls a temporary refuge against the encroaching darkness of the forest. The interior was sparse but functional, a space they had tailored to their needs as both a ranger and a survivor. They laid out their supplies on the small dining table: flares, a flashlight with spare batteries, a sturdy hunting knife, and a coil of rope. But they knew these tools alone wouldn't be enough. Clara Greyfeather's voice echoed in their mind. The forest does not forgive easily. To weaken the Maw, you must respect its rules and use the tools of balance. Alex retrieved the items Clara had given them during their last meeting: the talisman, its carved symbols glowing faintly in the dim light, and a small pouch containing herbs and powdered minerals meant to disrupt the creature's connection to the desecrated ground. As Alex packed their gear, they reviewed Clara's guidance. She had explained that fire and iron were the creature's weaknesses, remnants of the rituals once used to protect the sacred ground. Alex added a hatchet to their pack, its iron blade freshly sharpened, and a bundle of dry kindling to ensure they could build a fire if needed. The forest's fog made everything damp, and Alex couldn't afford to rely solely on the flares. With their physical preparations complete, Alex turned to the mental. They sat cross-legged on the floor, the talisman resting in their hands, and closed their eyes. The forest's oppressive energy had seeped into their thoughts over the past days, filling their dreams with shadows and whispers. Alex took slow, deliberate breaths, focusing on the steady rhythm of their heartbeat. "You are not just fighting the Maw," Clara had said. "You are fighting the fear it feeds on. Control your fear, and you weaken its power." As twilight descended, Alex made their way to Clara's cabin for one final piece of guidance. The elder met them at the door, her expression solemn but resolute. Inside, the room was filled with the scent of burning sage, the smoke curling around them like a protective embrace. Clara handed Alex a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "These are the totems from the desecrated ground," she said. "Place them in a circle around the site. They will help you channel the forest's energy and contain the Maw. But remember, the ritual isn't just about the tools. It's about intent. You must acknowledge the pain that was caused here and offer something in return." Alex unwrapped the bundle, revealing a set of intricately carved wooden figures. Each one represented an aspect of the forest: a deer, a raven, a bear, and a tree. The carvings were worn but still imbued with a quiet power. Alex nodded, carefully placing the totems in their pack. "Thank you," they said, their voice steady despite the weight of the task ahead. Clara placed a hand on their shoulder. "You are not alone, Alex. The forest may be angry, but it also remembers those who fight to protect it. Trust yourself." The journey back to the desecrated ground was fraught with tension. The fog seemed thicker than ever, wrapping around Alex like a living thing. The forest's usual sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of birds, were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that set Alex's nerves on edge. The talisman grew warm against their chest, its faint hum a reminder of the protection it offered. When Alex reached the clearing, they took a moment to survey the area. The massive tree stump at the center loomed like a scar on the forest floor, its surface marked by deep gouges and ancient carvings. The totems they had placed earlier were still intact, their presence a small comfort in the oppressive space. Alex set to work, arranging the totems in a precise circle around the stump, each one aligned with the cardinal directions as Clara had instructed. As they worked, the forest seemed to shift around them. Shadows moved at the edges of their vision, and the air grew colder with each passing moment. Alex struck a flare, the red light casting long, flickering shadows that danced across the clearing. They placed the bundle of herbs and minerals in the center of the circle, their hands steady despite the growing sense of unease. The final step was lighting the fire. Alex used the kindling they had brought, building a small, contained blaze within the circle of totems. The flames burned brightly, their light pushing back the encroaching darkness. Alex knelt by the fire, the talisman clutched tightly in their hand, and began to recite the words Clara had taught them. Lux et veritas vincant umbras. Light and truth conquer shadows. The forest responded immediately. The symbols carved into the trees around the clearing began to glow, their light pulsating in time with Alex's chant. The ground beneath the tree stump trembled, as though the forest itself was awakening. The oppressive silence was broken by a low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down Alex's spine. The Moor emerged from the mist, its towering form even more menacing than before. Its glowing eyes burned with rage, and its elongated limbs moved with predatory grace as it approached the circle of fire. Alex rose to their feet, the talisman held high as they continued the chant. Lux et veritas vincant umbras. The creature let out a deafening roar, its skeletal frame shuddering as it tested the boundary of the circle. The totems glowed brighter, their light forming an invisible barrier that forced the Moor to keep its distance. Alex could see the creature's form flickering, its edges blurring as though caught between worlds. For the first time, Alex felt a flicker of hope. The fire and the totems were holding, and the Moor's power was waning. But they knew this was only the beginning. The real battle was yet to come, and Alex would need every ounce of strength and courage to face what lay ahead. As the flames crackled and the light from the totems grew stronger, Alex took a deep breath, steadying themselves for what was to come. The confrontation with the Moor would be their greatest test, a battle not just against a creature of darkness but against the fear and pain that had taken root in the heart of Silent Pines. And in that moment, standing in the glow of the fire, Alex knew one thing for certain: they would not back down. The clearing at the desecrated ground had become a place of haunting beauty and foreboding menace. As Alex Thatcher stood amidst the glowing totems and crackling flames, they knew the hunt was about to begin. The Moor was not merely a predator, it was a force of the forest, cunning and relentless, and the final confrontation would push Alex to the limits of their strength and resolve. The forest seemed to respond to Alex's presence, its whispers rising in intensity, carried on the wind like a distant chant. Shadows flickered at the edge of the clearing, and the fog thickened, swirling in tendrils that writhed like living things. The Moor was near. Alex's breath came in steady, measured inhales. The tools Clara had given them were arranged in precise positions, the talisman around their neck, the herbs and minerals forming a protective circle, and the wooden totems standing guard. Despite their preparations, a sense of vulnerability settled over Alex. The Moor was unlike anything they had faced before, a creature born of the forest's pain and rage. To survive, they would need to outthink it. A guttural growl broke the silence, low and reverberating, sending a chill down Alex's spine. They turned toward the sound, their flashlight slicing through the darkness. The beam illuminated nothing but trees and shifting fog, yet the growl persisted, moving from one side of the clearing to the other as though the forest itself were growling. Alex clenched their jaw, their grip tightening on the hatchet at their side. "Come on," Alex muttered under their breath. "I'm ready for you." The Moor emerged from the mist with predatory grace, its skeletal frame illuminated by the glow of the totems. Its glowing eyes burned with malevolence, and its elongated limbs moved with unnerving fluidity. The creature paused at the edge of the clearing, its gaze fixed on Alex. It was assessing them, its movements deliberate and calculated, like a hunter sizing up its prey. Alex raised the talisman, its carved symbols glowing faintly in response. "I know what you are," they said, their voice steady. "And I'm not afraid of you." The Moor let out a deafening roar, its skeletal form shuddering as it stepped into the clearing. The air grew heavier, the oppressive energy pressing against Alex like an invisible weight. They stood their ground, the talisman warm against their chest, as the creature advanced. The hunt began with a flurry of movement. The Moor lunged, its elongated claws swiping through the air with terrifying speed. Alex dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike, and swung the hatchet in a wide arc. The blade connected with the creature's arm, but instead of blood, a dark, viscous substance oozed from the wound. The Moor hissed, its glowing eyes narrowing as it pulled back, circling Alex like a wolf stalking its prey. Using the talisman as a shield, Alex took a step forward, their voice rising above the forest's whispers. "You don't scare me," they said, though their pounding heart betrayed their fear. "You're nothing but a shadow." The Moor snarled, its form flickering like a mirage. It lashed out again, its claws raking through the air, but this time Alex was ready. They struck a flare, the sudden burst of light forcing the creature to recoil. The red glow illuminated the clearing, casting long, jagged shadows that danced across the trees. Alex pressed their advantage, brandishing the flare like a torch as they advanced on the creature. The forest seemed to fight back as Alex pursued the Moor. The ground beneath their feet grew soft and treacherous, roots twisting like serpents to trip them up. Branches reached down from above, their gnarled fingers clawing at Alex's clothes. The whispers grew louder, an incomprehensible chorus that filled their ears and made it hard to think. "You won't stop me," Alex growled, their voice cutting through the cacophony. "This ends here." The Moor retreated into the fog, its glowing eyes the only indication of its presence. Alex followed, their footsteps deliberate and cautious. They struck another flare, the light cutting through the mist, revealing fleeting glimpses of the creature as it moved through the trees. Each time Alex closed the distance, the Moor would slip further into the shadows, its movements as elusive as smoke. Hours seemed to pass in the relentless game of cat and mouse. The forest grew darker, the fog thicker, and the oppressive energy heavier. Alex's body ached from the strain, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. But they refused to give up. This was their forest, their fight, and they would see it through to the end. Finally, the chase led Alex to a place they had never seen before, an ancient grove at the heart of silent pines. The trees here were massive, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their branches forming an almost impenetrable canopy. The ground was covered in a thick layer of moss, and the air was filled with the faint hum of energy. At the center of the grove stood the Moor, its form flickering as though caught between worlds. The creature's glowing eyes burned brighter than ever, and its guttural growls reverberated through the grove. Alex tightened their grip on the talisman, their resolve unshaken despite the fear coursing through their veins. "This is where it ends," Alex said, their voice steady. "No more running. No more fear." The final battle was fierce and unrelenting. The Moor lashed out with its claws, its movements a blur of speed and fury. Alex fought back with everything they had, using the talisman, the flares, and the iron hatchet to keep the creature at bay. Each strike of the hatchet left dark, oozing wounds on the creature's skeletal frame, and each burst of light from the flares forced it to retreat. But the Moor was relentless, its rage driving it forward even as its body began to falter. The creature's form flickered more frequently, its edges blurring as though it were unraveling. Alex could see the toll the fight was taking on it, but they knew they couldn't let their guard down. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and the Moor would seize the advantage. As the battle raged, Alex realized they couldn't defeat the Moor through brute force alone. The creature was tied to the forest, its power drawn from the desecrated ground. To truly weaken it, Alex needed to sever that connection. Recalling Clara's guidance, Alex reached into their pack and retrieved the pouch of herbs and minerals. They scattered the contents across the grove, the powder shimmering faintly as it settled on the mossy ground. The Moor hissed, its form recoiling as the energy of the grove began to shift. The glowing totems from the desecrated ground flared to life, their light converging on the Moor. The creature let out a deafening roar, its body writhing as the forest's energy closed in around it. Alex watched as the flickering form of the Moor began to dissolve, its glowing eyes dimming as it was consumed by the light. The grove fell silent, the oppressive energy lifting as the Moor vanished into the ether. Alex collapsed to their knees, their body trembling from exhaustion and relief. The forest around them seemed to exhale, its ancient trees standing tall and still, their branches no longer twisted with malice. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Silent Pines was at peace. But Alex knew the battle wasn't truly over. The forest's balance had been restored, but the scars of the past remained. And as Alex rose to their feet, the talisman still warm against their chest, They vowed to protect the forest and ensure its secrets were never disturbed again. The grove's oppressive silence lingered in Alex Thatcher's ears, even as the flickering form of the moor began to dissolve into the ether. The creature's final roar echoed through the forest, a haunting sound that seemed to reverberate in Alex's chest. Though the immediate danger had passed, Alex knew that their work was far from over. The forest's balance had been broken for decades, and the moor's presence was a symptom of a deeper wound that needed healing. Alex knelt at the center of the grove, surrounded by the glowing totems Clara had entrusted to them. The fire they had built still burned, casting flickering shadows across the ancient trees. Alex placed a hand on the damp, mossy ground and closed their eyes, focusing on the hum of energy that radiated from the desecrated earth. Clara's words returned to them, steady and clear. The forest remembers its pain. You must give it a reason to forgive. The first step was to restore the sacred site. Alex gathered the scattered remnants of the desecrated ground, carefully piecing together the shattered totems and placing them in a circle around the massive tree stump at the grove's center. Each totem represented a facet of the forest's essence, the deer for its grace, the raven for its wisdom, the bear for its strength, and the tree for its enduring spirit. As Alex worked, they whispered an apology to the forest, their voice soft but resolute. "I'm sorry for what was taken from you," they said, their words carried away by the gentle breeze. "I'm here to make it right." With the totems in place, Alex retrieved the pouch of herbs and minerals Clara had given them. They scattered the contents across the grove, the powder shimmering faintly in the firelight. The air grew heavier, charged with an energy that made the hairs on Alex's arms stand on end. The symbols carved into the surrounding trees began to glow once more, their light pulsating in time with Alex's heartbeat. The next step was the ritual. Clara had taught Alex the ancient words, a chant passed down through generations to honor the forest and seek its forgiveness. Alex stood at the center of the circle, the talisman held tightly in their hand, and began to recite the chant. Their voice was steady at first, but as the words flowed, it grew stronger, filling the grove with a resonant cadence that seemed to harmonize with the forest's energy. Lux et veritas vincant umbras. Veritas restituit equilibrium. Light and truth conquer shadows. Truth restores balance. The forest responded immediately. The glowing symbols on the trees flared brighter, their light forming a protective dome around the grove. The fire at the center of the circle roared to life, its flames turning a brilliant blue. The oppressive weight that had hung over the forest lifted slightly, replaced by a sense of cautious anticipation. The forest was listening. As Alex continued the chant, they felt a presence around them. The shadows at the edge of the grove coalesced into faint, flickering shapes, figures of those who had been lost to the moor. Their faces were indistinct, their forms ethereal, but their sorrow was palpable. Alex's voice faltered for a moment as the weight of their pain washed over them. "I see you," Alex said, their voice trembling. "I see your suffering. And I promise, I will not let it be in vain." The figures lingered for a moment longer before dissolving into the light of the totems. Alex took a deep breath, their resolve hardening. They would carry the memory of those lost, but they would not let it break them. The final phase of the ritual required a sacrifice. Clara had been clear, to restore balance, Alex needed to offer something of personal significance, something that represented their own connection to the forest. Alex reached into their pack and retrieved a small wooden carving of a pine tree. It was rough and unpolished, a trinket they had made as a child during one of their first forays into the forest with their father. The carving was a symbol of their bond with silent pines, a reminder of the solace the forest had once brought them. Alex placed the carving in the fire, watching as the flames consumed it. The light from the totems intensified, and the ground beneath Alex's feet trembled. The oppressive energy that had haunted the grove began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of calm that felt almost sacred. The forest seemed to exhale, its breath a soft rustling of leaves that carried away the lingering tension. As the ritual concluded, Alex collapsed to their knees, exhaustion washing over them. The totem's light faded, leaving only the soft glow of the fire to illuminate the grove. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the gentle hum of the forest's natural rhythms. Birds called softly from the treetops, and the distant sound of running water reached Alex's ears. The forest was healing. Alex remained in the grove for some time, their body and mind recovering from the ordeal. They thought of Clara and the wisdom she had shared, of the lives lost to the moor, and of their own journey to this moment. Silent Pines had been a place of fear and pain, but it had also been a place of growth and resilience. Alex knew they couldn't undo the past, but they could honor it by protecting the forest and ensuring its balance was maintained. When Alex finally rose to their feet, the talisman around their neck felt lighter, its warmth a comforting presence against their chest. They looked around the grove, taking in the sight of the restored totems and the peaceful energy that now filled the space. Silent Pines was no longer a place of terror. It was a place of renewal, a testament to the power of reconciliation and respect. As Alex made their way back to the edge of the forest, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. But this time, the gaze felt different. It wasn't malevolent or threatening, it was protective, almost grateful. Alex smiled faintly, their steps steady as they left the grove behind. Silent Pines was at peace, and Alex knew their role as its guardian had only just begun. The first rays of dawn broke through the canopy of Silent Pines, casting soft golden light over the forest that had, hours ago, been a place of terror and despair. Alex Thatcher stood at the edge of the grove, their breath visible in the crisp morning air, and felt a profound sense of quiet that was unlike any they had experienced before. The oppressive weight of the moor's presence was gone, replaced by a subtle, serene energy that seemed to hum through the trees and earth. Silent Pines was alive again, but now it felt like a guardian rather than a predator. Alex's body ached from the night's ordeal. Their arms were heavy, their legs unsteady, and the talisman around their neck felt lighter than it had in days. The forest no longer seemed to press down on them, instead, it seemed to hold them, as if acknowledging their role in restoring its balance. With every step they took back toward Haven's Ridge, Alex reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. They had come to Silent Pines seeking peace, but what they found was a purpose far greater than themselves. As they crossed familiar trails, the forest revealed its slow but steady recovery. Birds flitted between the trees, their songs tentative but hopeful. Small animals ventured into the underbrush, their movements cautious but unafraid. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. The forest felt alive in a way Alex had never truly noticed before, as though it was thanking them for their efforts. When Alex reached Clara Greyfeather's cabin, they were greeted by the sight of smoke curling from the chimney and the sound of Clara humming a soft tune as she worked in her garden. She looked up as Alex approached, her sharp eyes taking in their weary frame and the talisman that still hung around their neck. Without a word, Clara opened the door and gestured for Alex to enter. Inside, the cabin was warm and filled with the comforting aroma of herbs and freshly brewed tea. Clara set a steaming cup in front of Alex and took a seat across from them. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence filled only by the crackle of the fire. "It's done," Alex finally said, their voice low but steady. "The moor is gone. The forest, it's different now." Clara nodded, her expression a mix of relief and quiet pride. "The forest has waited a long time for this," she said. "You've done more than most would have dared. But you should know, Alex, the work doesn't end here." Alex looked at her, their exhaustion momentarily giving way to curiosity. "What do you mean?" Clara leaned forward, her gaze intense. "The forest may be at peace now, but balance is fragile. The scars of what happened here won't disappear overnight. It needs a guardian, someone who understands its pain and respects its power. Someone like you." The weight of Clara's words settled over Alex, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a calling, a path they had unknowingly been walking toward for years. They thought of the lives lost to the moor, the desecration of the sacred ground, and the resilience of the forest in the face of so much pain. They thought of the promise they had made during the ritual to honor the forest and protect it from further harm. "I'll do it," Alex said, their voice firm. "I'll protect it." Clara smiled, a rare warmth lighting her features. "Good." The forest chose well. In the weeks that followed, Alex settled into their new role as the forest's guardian. They patrolled the trails with renewed purpose, their presence a reassuring constant for the townsfolk who had long feared Silent Pines. The stories of the Moor began to fade, replaced by tales of the ranger who had faced the forest's darkness and emerged stronger. Though Alex rarely spoke of what had happened in the grove, the talisman they wore was enough to silence any questions. It had become a symbol of their bond with the forest, a reminder of the balance they had fought to restore. The forest itself seemed to welcome Alex's stewardship. The trails grew clearer, the trees healthier, and the wildlife more abundant. Even the fog that had once clung to the forest like a shroud became lighter, less oppressive. Yet, despite the peace, Alex knew that Silent Pines would always hold its mysteries. The forest was ancient, its depths still unexplored, and its secrets waiting to be discovered. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest was bathed in golden light, Alex stood at the edge of the grove where it had all begun. The totems still stood, their carved symbols glowing faintly in the twilight. The fire pit at the grove's center was cold now, its ashes scattered by the wind, but the energy of the place remained. Alex placed a hand on one of the totems, feeling the hum of life that pulsed through the wood. As they turned to leave, a soft rustling caught their attention. Alex froze, their hand instinctively moving to the talisman around their neck. From the shadows at the edge of the grove, a pair of glowing eyes stared back at them. The gaze was not hostile, but watchful, a reminder that the forest was never truly tamed. Alex held the creature's gaze for a long moment before nodding and stepping away. "You're still here," Alex murmured, their voice tinged with both reverence and understanding. "And so am I." Back in Haven's Ridge, the townsfolk began to notice a change. The forest, once feared, now seemed less forbidding. The stories of the Moor became whispers of a past that no longer haunted the present. Clara continued to guide Alex, teaching them the rituals and traditions that had been passed down through her family for generations. Together, they ensured that the sacred ground remained undisturbed and that the balance of Silent Pines was preserved. For Alex, the journey had been transformative. They had come to Silent Pines seeking peace, and while they hadn't found it in the way they had expected, they had found something far greater. The forest had tested them, broken them, and rebuilt them into something stronger. And though the weight of their new role was immense, it was one they carried with pride. As the seasons changed and the forest thrived, Alex knew that their story was only beginning. Silent Pines would always hold its shadows, its whispers, and its secrets, but it would also hold its guardian. And as long as Alex walked its trails, the forest would remain a place of balance, resilience, and quiet strength. In the heart of Silent Pines, the echoes of the past faded, replaced by the promise of a future forged in harmony. And as Alex stood beneath the towering trees, they knew one thing for certain. The forest had found its peace, and so had they.